You can tell a lot about a person by where they sleep when they have nowhere left to go. That was the thought running through my head as I curled deeper into the driver's seat and pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. The rain tapped softly against the windshield, creating a steady rhythm that almost drowned out the ache in my chest. Almost. My name is Emma Collins, and 3 months earlier, I had never imagined I would be spending a Thursday night sleeping in my car. Yet there I was, parked beneath a flickering streetlight on the edge of downtown Chicago, trying to convince myself that everything would somehow work out. The old sedan smelled faintly of coffee and the takeout containers I had not gotten around to throwing away. A blanket covered my legs, and a small duffel bag sat in the passenger seat holding everything that currently mattered in my life. The apartment was gone. The job was hanging by a thread. My savings account had become a painful reminder of how quickly life could change. I glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. 11:43. Most of the city had already settled into the comfort of warm homes and familiar routines. I was trying to decide whether I could afford enough gas to keep the heater running another hour. The thought made me laugh softly. It was not a happy laugh. Just the kind that appears when life becomes so ridiculous that tears seem unnecessary. Outside, the rain continued falling in thin silver lines beneath the streetlights. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping across the parking lot before disappearing into the darkness. Nobody paid attention to the old sedan tucked into the far corner. Nobody noticed the woman trying to pretend she was camping instead of homeless. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe the interview I had scheduled would lead somewhere. Maybe I would finally catch a break. The sound of tires crunching over wet pavement pulled me from my thoughts. First I ignored it. Parking lots attracted all kinds of late-night traffic. But a few seconds later, bright headlights washed across my windshield and remained there. My eyes opened immediately. A black SUV had entered the lot and stopped several spaces away. Another followed behind it. Then another. My stomach tightened. The vehicles were impossible to ignore. Expensive. Polished. Out of place in this forgotten corner of the city. I watched through the rain-speckled glass as a tall man stepped out of the first SUV. Even from a distance there was something different about him. He moved with calm confidence, as if the world naturally shifted around him instead of the other way around. His dark coat barely stirred in the wind as he surveyed the lot. For a moment, I convinced myself he was looking for someone else. Then his gaze landed directly on my car. My pulse quickened. He did not look away. The strange thing was that I did not feel threatened. Nervous, yes. Embarrassed, absolutely. But not threatened. The man took a few steps forward before stopping beneath the glow of a streetlight. Rain fell around him, catching in the light like scattered diamonds. He studied the car for a long moment, then glanced toward the fogged-up windows. It suddenly occurred to me how pathetic the situation must look from the outside. A young woman sleeping alone in an aging sedan at midnight. I sank lower in my seat and hoped he would leave. Instead, he continued standing there, watching, waiting, and somehow deep in my chest, I had the unsettling feeling that this man was about to change everything. Dominic Romano stepped closer, his tall figure partially illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlight, and for a moment I could only stare, unsure whether to panic or silently hope he would simply drive away. Instead, he leaned slightly against his SUV, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes calm but attentive, observing me with an intensity that was almost tangible through the rain-streaked glass. The wet pavement reflected the light in streaks that mirrored the tension rising in my chest, and I hugged my knees closer to my chest as I tried to shrink into the seat. Dominic's presence was undeniably commanding, yet not threatening, and there was something in the way he waited, patient and deliberate, that made it clear he would not simply walk away. I swallowed nervously, uncertain if I should explain my situation, but before I could form words, he tilted his head slightly and spoke, his voice low, steady, and surprisingly gentle. "You cannot stay here like this." It was not a question. It was an observation, a statement of fact that carried both concern and authority. I bit my lip, hesitant to respond. What could I say? That I had no place to go? That the apartment lease had fallen through? That work hours had been cut? That exhaustion had driven me to park in this forgotten corner of the city? I looked down at my hands, twisting a thread on my jacket, feeling the cold seep through my clothes and into my bones. Dominic moved a step closer, his gaze shifting toward the small duffel bag beside me, then back to my face, and I sensed an unspoken offer, a chance to escape the discomfort, the rain, and the isolation. "Come with me," he said finally, and it was not a demand. It was a lifeline tossed gently across the chasm of my current reality. I hesitated, my heart hammering, uncertainty battling relief, and then I saw it, the faintest warmth behind his eyes, the subtle patience, and the knowledge that he would not allow harm to come to me while he was present. Slowly I unlocked the door and pushed it open, the scent of rain and wet asphalt filling my senses. Dominic offered his hand to help me out, and I took it cautiously, stepping into the night with a strange mixture of fear and hope. As I moved toward the SUV, Noah's small duffel bag tucked under my arm and the rain continuing to sprinkle around us, I realized that something in the world had shifted. A man who commanded attention with quiet authority was now offering protection, and for the first time in hours I felt a trace of safety. The engine hummed softly as we drove off, the city lights flickering past in streaks of gold and silver, and in that quiet movement, I began to sense that this night, which had begun with exhaustion and uncertainty, was becoming the first step into a story far larger than I could have imagined. A night that would change the course of everything I thought I knew about safety, trust, and unexpected kindness. The warmth inside the SUV felt unreal after hours spent in the cold. Soft leather seats, quiet lighting, and the faint scent of cedarwood surrounded me as the city drifted past outside the tinted windows. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Rain slid down the glass in silver streaks while Chicago's skyline glowed against the night sky. I sat with my duffel bag on my lap, trying to understand how my evening had changed so completely in less than 30 minutes. Dominic sat across from me, his posture relaxed but attentive. He did not stare. He did not ask invasive questions. Somehow that made me trust him more. Most people wanted explanations. Most people wanted details. Dominic seemed content to wait until I was ready to speak. Eventually curiosity won. "Why did you stop?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Dominic glanced toward me. "Because you looked like someone who needed help." I laughed softly. "There are a lot of people who need help." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "And tonight you were the one I found." The answer should not have comforted me. Yet somehow it did. Outside, the rain continued falling. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. The city looked beautiful from inside the safety of the vehicle. I had spent so many nights worrying about rent, job applications, and overdue bills that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply sit still. Dominic studied me briefly before looking back out the window. "How long?" he asked quietly. I knew exactly what he meant. 3 weeks. Saying it out loud made my stomach tighten. 3 weeks sleeping in the car? I nodded. Not every night. Sometimes friends let me stay on couches. Sometimes I found cheap motels. But mostly. My voice faded. Dominic's expression remained calm, but something shifted behind his eyes. Not pity. Understanding. And nobody helped. I looked down at my hands. People have their own lives. The answer sounded sad even to me. Silence settled between us again. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that allowed difficult truths to exist without judgment. A few moments later, the SUV turned away from downtown traffic and entered a quieter neighborhood. Lined with old trees and elegant homes. My pulse quickened slightly. "Where are we going?" Dominic looked toward me. "Somewhere warm." It was such a simple answer. Yet after everything that had happened, it felt almost overwhelming. The vehicle continued forward before finally turning through a set of iron gates. Beyond them stood a large stone estate illuminated by soft golden lights. I stared through the window, momentarily speechless. The house looked less like a residence and more like something from a movie. Warm light glowed from dozens of windows. The ground stretched across several acres. Fountains shimmered beneath the rain. My first instinct was disbelief. My second was caution. Dominic seemed to sense both immediately. "You are not obligated to stay," he said calmly. "If you are uncomfortable, I can arrange a hotel instead." The fact that he gave me a choice eased something inside me. He was not trying to control the situation. He was trying to solve a problem. A difference that suddenly felt important. The SUV rolled to a stop beneath a covered entrance. One of the men from the other vehicle stepped forward and opened the door. Dominic exited first, then offered his hand. Rain tapped softly against the stone driveway around us. I looked at the enormous house, then at the man standing patiently beside me. Every instinct told me my life was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to the loneliness I understood. The other led into complete uncertainty. For reasons I could not explain, I found myself placing my hand in his and stepping forward. The interior of the estate was breathtaking. Marble floors gleamed beneath our feet, and soft golden lights illuminated paintings and sculptures that spoke of refinement and wealth. Dominic led me down a wide corridor with high ceilings, his hand occasionally brushing my elbow as if to guide me, not control me. I clutched my small duffel bag closer, still overwhelmed by the sudden shift from the rain-slicked city streets to this palatial calm. He spoke in low, measured tones, explaining that the guest rooms were ready, warm, and fully stocked, though he did not pressure me to use them. Could only nod. My eyes darting to every detail, the grand staircase, the polished banisters, the antique furnishings, each piece telling a story I could not yet read. Dominic stopped at a door with subtle carvings, opened it, and gestured for me to enter. The room smelled faintly of cedar and linen, with thick curtains drawn against the chill outside. A soft rug covered part of the floor, and a small reading nook by the window invited comfort. I placed my bag down cautiously, letting myself sink slightly into the warmth of the room. Dominic did not leave. He remained in the doorway, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room as though ensuring it met my needs without being intrusive. A faint smile appeared on his face when I sank onto the edge of the bed, exhausted yet relieved. The rain outside continued to tap against the windows, the rhythmic sound oddly soothing. For the first time that night, I felt the raw tension of being alone slowly ebb, replaced by cautious safety. Dominic leaned against the frame of the doorway and spoke softly, not as a man asserting authority, but as someone who genuinely cared. "Rest if you need. Nothing will touch you here." His words were simple, but laden with a gravity that resonated deep within me. I exhaled, letting the exhaustion and anxiety melt slightly, glancing toward him with a mix of gratitude and cautious curiosity. He acknowledged my glance with a slight nod, eyes steady, quiet, and attentive. The subtle dynamics of trust and protection began to settle between us in the silent moments, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound from the estate grounds. I felt the shift. The man who had initially startled me with his presence outside the car now represented stability and assurance. The grand space around us did not intimidate but rather embraced a sense of safety, a private world where he had chosen to provide care. I sat back on the bed, letting the plush mattress mold to my frame, my thoughts tracing the surreal journey of the last hour, from the cold streets to this unexpected sanctuary. Dominic remained a measured presence nearby, his watchful calm creating a protective bubble, and in that quiet I realized that this night was only the beginning of a story that neither of us could yet predict, one that would entwine caution, trust, and the subtle emergence of connection. I woke up to sunlight spilling across the room, and for a brief, beautiful second, I forgot everything. I forgot the car. I forgot the cold nights. I forgot the constant anxiety that had followed me for weeks like a shadow. All I felt was warmth. The mattress beneath me was softer than anything I had slept on in months, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted faintly through the air. Then reality returned. I sat up quickly, momentarily disoriented by the elegant room surrounding me. The previous night replayed in fragments. The rain. The parking lot.
Dominice Romano.
The estate. I glanced toward the window. Morning sunlight illuminated perfectly maintained gardens stretching beyond the glass. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Before I could answer, the door opened slightly and a woman carrying a breakfast tray stepped inside. She offered a warm smile and placed the tray on a nearby table. Fresh fruit, eggs, toast, and coffee filled the room with comforting aromas. "Mr. Romano wanted to make sure you ate," she explained before quietly leaving. I stared at the tray. Nobody had checked whether I had eaten breakfast in a very long time. The simple gesture affected me more than it should have. After showering and changing into clean clothes provided in the closet, I finally gathered enough courage to leave the room. The estate felt even larger during daylight. Sunlight poured through massive windows. Staff members moved efficiently through the halls. Everything seemed to function with effortless precision. Yet despite its size, the house felt surprisingly welcoming. As I reached the main staircase, I heard laughter. Genuine laughter. The sound drew me toward a sunlit family room overlooking the gardens. Dominic stood near the fireplace speaking with an older gentleman in a tailored suit. The conversation stopped when he noticed me. His eyes immediately softened. "Good morning." The simple greeting somehow eased my nerves. "Good morning," I replied. Dominic gestured toward a nearby seating area. "Did you sleep well?" I laughed softly. "Better than I have in weeks." Satisfaction flickered briefly across his face. Not pride. Relief. As though my comfort genuinely mattered to him. Before either of us could continue, a young girl rushed into the room carrying a sketchbook. She could not have been older than 10. Her blonde hair bounced as she ran. "Dominic, look what I drew." She stopped abruptly when she noticed me. Curious blue eyes widened. Dominic smiled. "Emma, this is Sophia." "Sophia, this is Emma." The girl immediately walked closer and studied me with complete honesty. Children never pretended. "You look sad," she announced. Heat rushed into my cheeks. Dominic nearly smiled. "Sophia." "What?" she asked innocently. Then she turned back toward me. "You do look sad. But not as sad as yesterday." The room grew quiet. Her observation landed with surprising accuracy. I had been sad, exhausted, lost. Yet standing there now, surrounded by sunlight instead of darkness, something inside me felt different. Lighter. Sophia grabbed my hand before I could respond. "Come see my drawings." Dominic watched the interaction carefully. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly as the little girl pulled me toward a table covered in artwork. As I followed her, I glanced back toward him. For the first time since this strange journey had begun, I saw something unexpected in his expression. Not obligation, not responsibility, something far more personal. And somehow, that realization felt far more dangerous than sleeping alone in my car ever had. The afternoon sun had begun to dip lower, casting long golden streaks across the manicured lawns of the estate, and I followed Dominic through the winding hallways, my footsteps soft on the polished marble floors. The warmth from the previous morning lingered, but a subtle tension crept in as I realized how completely my life had shifted in a matter of hours. Each room we passed seemed to tell a story of careful planning and refined taste. Artwork lined the walls, furniture was arranged with precision, and yet nothing felt intimidating. Dominic led me to a library that overlooked the gardens, shelves stacked with books reaching the ceiling, and sunlight poured through tall windows, dust motes dancing in the rays. He gestured toward a cozy armchair near the fireplace. "Sit," he said softly, his voice calm but commanding in its quiet authority. I obeyed, placing my hands lightly on the chair's arms, feeling the smooth leather and subtle warmth radiating from the fireplace. For a moment, silence wrapped around us. I was acutely aware of his presence just a few feet away, and that awareness brought both comfort and a strange curiosity. Dominic moved to a window, looking out at the sprawling estate and the city beyond. "Do you feel safe here?" he asked, not looking at me directly, his tone steady but genuinely inquisitive. I paused, reflecting on the journey from a rainy parking lot to this sunlit sanctuary. "I think I do," I admitted, and for the first time in weeks it felt sincere. Dominic nodded, finally turning to face me. The soft light illuminated his features, sharp but approachable, eyes calm yet observant, and I noticed the subtle details of his demeanor. The way he stood, relaxed but poised, conveying confidence without intimidation. "It is important," he said slowly, "that you feel that way." He did not elaborate, yet the words held weight, a quiet reassurance embedded in authority. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the gardens, and the distant sound of water trickling from a fountain added a soft, rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. I glanced down at my hands, now relaxed, and felt the enormity of trust beginning to form. Dominic's calm presence, his careful attentiveness, and the absence of judgment or intrusion created a bubble where I could breathe. Slowly, I allowed myself to look around, noticing small touches, books left open, personal items arranged thoughtfully, the subtle warmth in the room, all evidence that this space had been prepared for more than mere aesthetics. The combination of elegance and comfort, of vigilance and consideration, made the moment tangible. As I sat there, watching the shifting light across the room and noticing the intricate balance of authority and gentleness Dominic exuded, I understood that this was more than temporary shelter. It was an initiation into a new rhythm of life, a slow, deliberate unfolding where safety, care, and subtle trust intertwined. The realization brought a small, quiet smile to my lips, and I looked up to see him watching me, as if understanding the impact of every action, every decision he had made to bring me to this point. In that silence, I sensed a connection forming, a delicate balance between independence and protection, a moment that promised that the story unfolding tonight was only the beginning of something far deeper than either of us could have anticipated. By the time evening settled over the estate, a gentle golden glow from the chandeliers filled the main hall, reflecting softly off polished floors and ornate furnishings. I followed Dominic down a wide corridor that led toward the library, my footsteps cautious yet curious, clutching my small duffel bag as I took in every detail of the expansive space. Dominic's presence beside me was steady, unassuming yet undeniably commanding, and I felt the strange reassurance of having someone so deliberate close at hand. The walls were lined with artwork and photographs, each capturing moments of a life filled with wealth and careful cultivation, yet not devoid of warmth or personality. As we entered the library, I noticed shelves packed with books of all sizes, sunlit through tall windows, dust motes suspended like tiny stars in the beams. Dominic gestured toward a comfortable armchair, and I sank into it, feeling the soft leather and the subtle warmth emanating from the fireplace. He remained standing, hands behind his back, observing without intruding, allowing me space yet radiating a protective vigilance that made the room feel safe despite its grandeur. I studied the collection of books and the fine details in the room while Dominic's presence anchored me in a mixture of calm and tension, the duality of safety and authority pressing in a way that drew my attention without force. Outside the window, the gardens glowed with late afternoon light, leaves glinting with residual raindrops, and I noticed the subtle movements of estate staff ensuring everything ran smoothly in the background, all executed with quiet precision. Dominic finally spoke, his voice low and measured, commenting on the tranquility of the room and subtly acknowledging the exhaustion I must have felt from recent events. I allowed myself to exhale, the weight of fear and uncertainty beginning to lift as the warmth of the room and his attentive, composed presence sank in. He moved toward the window, looking out briefly, then returned his gaze toward me, his eyes revealing an understanding that went beyond words. The combination of light, space, and Dominic's measured behavior created a rhythm I could follow, an invisible pattern of care and authority that slowly dissolved the tension I had carried for so long. I reached for a book on a lower shelf, running my fingers across its spine, and for the first time felt curiosity rather than dread. Dominic noted the movement with a subtle nod, and in that silent exchange, an unspoken connection began to form, built on trust, observation, and the quiet acknowledgement of vulnerability. Time seemed to slow, each movement deliberate, each sound measured, until the faint call of dinner from another part of the house reminded me that the day was far from over. Yet in the library, surrounded by sunlight and the richness of the estate, I began to understand the significance of presence, the way protective attention could alter perception, and the small but profound impact of a man whose quiet control could make a world of difference in the life of someone like me. The realization settled softly in my chest, and I allowed myself a small tentative smile, recognizing that the events of this evening marked the first true step toward a fragile, budding trust that neither of us could yet fully comprehend. The golden glow of the evening sun filtered through the tall windows of the estate, casting soft patterns across the polished floors, and I walked slowly alongside Dominic, my steps cautious but curious as the vast space around us seemed both imposing and strangely welcoming. The scent of polished wood and faintly burning candles lingered in the air, subtle yet comforting, and I noticed the way the light highlighted the contours of his face, calm and observant, revealing the careful attention he paid to my movements without intrusion. We moved toward the library again, but this time the atmosphere carried a different energy, one less about first impressions and more about quiet understanding. I followed as he gestured toward a low seating area near the window, sun streaming in and illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the air. Dominic remained standing, hands loosely clasped behind his back, watching as I took a seat and relaxed slightly into the chair, the leather soft beneath me, warmth from the sun lending a gentle weight to my body. I glanced around at the bookshelves, the arrangement of furniture, and the personal touches that suggested a life carefully curated yet lived with thoughtfulness. The soft murmur of estate staff moving quietly in the background created a rhythm that added to the sense of calm, contrasting with the chaos of the past few weeks and the city streets I had known. Dominic spoke gently, noting the beauty of the gardens beyond the windows and the way sunlight played on the water of the fountain outside. Yet his words carried an unspoken message of protection and attention, a subtle reassurance that I was in a space where I could simply exist without fear or expectation. As I absorbed the details of the room, the sunlight on polished wood, the intricate patterns in the carpet, the way the books leaned slightly on their shelves, I realized that this estate was more than a place of wealth. It was a carefully constructed environment that reflected Dominic's presence, a blend of authority and subtle warmth that created a bubble of safety. He finally took a step closer, and for the first time our eyes met fully, his gaze steady and calm, conveying understanding and patience without a word. I felt an unexpected lightness, a trace of trust beginning to form, as if the walls themselves encouraged openness, and I allowed my shoulders to relax slightly, recognizing the shift from tense caution to cautious comfort. The afternoon light changed slowly, shadows lengthening, and I began to understand the delicate balance Dominic maintained between control and care, authority and attentiveness, a rhythm that guided me without pressure and observed me without intrusion. The quiet sound of distant footsteps on marble, the subtle scent of candles, and the soft rustle of curtains in the breeze created an intimate atmosphere, one that allowed the slow formation of trust and the awareness that the night's earlier events, rain, uncertainty, the city streets, were now replaced by a space where protection, understanding, and an unspoken connection could take root, promising the emergence of a bond that neither of us could yet fully articulate but that would continue to shape the unfolding story. The following morning arrived with a quiet kind of peace that felt unfamiliar, almost fragile, as sunlight poured through the tall windows and painted the estate in shades of gold. I stood alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens, a warm cup of coffee resting between my hands, watching the fountain shimmer beneath the early light. Just days ago, I had been counting quarters for gas and trying to decide which parking lot felt safest for the night. Now I found myself surrounded by beauty, stability, and something even more surprising than either of those things: hope. The breeze moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers, and for the first time in months, my thoughts were not dominated by fear. Behind me, the sound of approaching footsteps drew my attention. I turned and found Dominic standing in the doorway. He was dressed simply compared to the first night I met him, yet there was still something unmistakable about him: confidence, control, quiet strength. He walked toward the railing beside me and looked out across the estate without speaking. Somehow the silence felt natural, comfortable. We stood there together for several moments before he finally spoke. "How are you feeling?" The question was simple, but I knew he meant more than whether I had slept well. I looked out toward the gardens and smiled softly. "Better than I have in a very long time." Dominic nodded once. The expression on his face remained calm, but I could see relief in his eyes. Genuine relief, as though my answer mattered to him more than he intended to show. We watched the fountain together while the morning sun climbed higher. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear Sophia laughing as she ran through the gardens. The sound made me smile. Dominic glanced toward the noise before looking back at me. "When I found you that night," he said quietly, "I thought I was helping a stranger." My heart tightened slightly. There was something different in his voice, something more personal, more vulnerable. He continued watching the horizon as he spoke. "I have spent most of my life solving problems, fixing situations, protecting people." He paused briefly. "But I never expected one of those people to change something in me." Emotion caught unexpectedly in my chest. The morning air suddenly felt warmer. Dominic finally turned toward me. His gaze was steady, honest, and completely unguarded. "You walked through those gates carrying everything you owned in a single bag," he said softly. "And somehow you still managed to care about everyone around you." I lowered my eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. "I was just trying to survive." "No," he replied gently. You were doing much more than that. Silence settled between us once again. But this time it carried meaning. Understanding. Recognition. Gratitude. I looked out across the estate one final time, taking in the sunlight, the gardens, and the sense of peace that surrounded us. Then I realized something important. The greatest gift Dominic had given me was not a room, a meal, or a safe place to sleep. It was the chance to believe that difficult chapters did not have to be permanent. That life could change in a single moment. That kindness could arrive when you least expected it. Dominic extended his hand toward me. I looked at it, then at him, and smiled. Without hesitation, I placed my hand in his. The morning sunlight wrapped around us as Sophia's laughter echoed through the gardens below. And standing there beside the man who had refused to leave me alone on my worst night, I finally understood that sometimes the people who save us do not rescue us from danger. Sometimes they rescue us from believing that nobody cares.